When my daughter-in-law told me to leave the room, I smiled instead of crying. I don't know why I smiled. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was because I didn't want her to see how small I suddenly felt. I remember holding the edge of the chair, feeling the wood under my fingers, pretending I was steady. Inside, something shifted. Not loudly, not all at once, just a quiet crack, like a cup breaking somewhere far away. They had promised to care for us. They said it so easily, and I believed them just as easily. At night, when the house went quiet, I replayed those promises in my head. I wondered when they stopped meaning what they once did. I wondered if they ever meant them at all. Silence doesn't arrive suddenly. It grows. At first, it was missed calls, then shorter conversations, then days without messages. Watching the light move across the floor. I told myself they were busy. Life gets busy. That's what I said out loud. That's what I repeated until it sounded true. But silence has weight. And every day, it pressed a little harder on my chest. We lived in a small house that always smelled like tea and soap. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm. The kitchen window faced the street, and every morning I watched neighbors pass by while the kettle boiled. Family dinners mattered to me. Even simple meals felt special when everyone sat together. I believed that sharing food was a way of saying, "I'm here, I care." When my son married, I welcomed his wife with open arms. I told myself this was a new chapter, a fuller table, a louder house. For a while it was. They told us not to worry about the future. They said we would never be alone. They said, "We're family. We'll take care of everything." I nodded and smiled. I didn't ask for proof. Love doesn't usually ask for proof. It trusts. Looking back, I realize how fragile trust can be when it rests only on words. The first change was in the way she spoke to me. Her voice wasn't unkind, just distant, like someone talking from another room. I noticed how she stopped asking for my help in the kitchen, how she closed the door more often, how laughter left the house quietly, without announcement. My son avoided my eyes. Not always, just enough for me to notice. I told myself not to read too much into it. I told myself I was imagining things. One evening, we ate dinner without waiting for each other. That had never happened before. I stared at the empty chair across from me and felt something tighten in my throat. No one said anything. Plates clinked. A television murmured in the background. That was when I realized how loneliness can exist even in a full room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse me. She simply said, "It would be better if you stayed out of the way." Out of the way. Like furniture. Like something old and inconvenient. I nodded. I even thanked her. My mouth said things my heart didn't understand yet. Later that night, I sat on my bed and stared at the wall. I felt hollow, not angry, just empty. After that, they stopped including me in decisions. Plans were made without me. Doors closed more often. Weeks passed. No one asked how I was sleeping. No one noticed I was eating less. That was the moment I understood. Not through words, but through absence. Pain changes shape over time. At first, it's sharp. Then, it becomes dull. Like an ache you carry everywhere. I stopped waiting by the window. I started spending more time alone with my thoughts. Some days were harder than others. But something unexpected happened. I grew quieter. And in that quiet, I found strength I didn't know I had. I don't hate them. Hate requires energy. I don't have that kind of energy anymore. Instead, I learned to let go of expectations. I learned that promises don't always come true, and that doesn't mean I failed. People leave even when they said they wouldn't. If I've learned anything, it's this: love should not make you feel small. Care should not disappear when it becomes inconvenient. I still believe in kindness. I still believe in family. But now I believe in myself too. At night, when the house is quiet, I make my tea and sit with the silence. It no longer frightens me, because I know this now. Even when others disappear, I remain. Please don't forget to leave a review. Explore more by joining me on Patreon. The days after that felt longer than usual. Morning came, but it didn't bring energy with it. It only brought light through the curtains and the same quiet thoughts waiting for me. I moved slowly around the house. I washed dishes that were already clean. I folded clothes that didn't need folding. I did these things because stopping felt heavier than continuing. No one noticed. And that was the hardest part. Sometimes I stood in the doorway of my room, listening. I hoped to hear my son's voice. Even a sigh would have been enough. But the house stayed still, as if it were holding its breath. At night, memories came without asking. I remembered my son as a child, holding my hand when crossing the road. I remembered packing his school lunches, cutting fruit into small pieces so he wouldn't choke. I remembered how he used to look back and wave before going inside his classroom. He always waved, even when the other children didn't. Those memories felt close and far at the same time, like photographs fading at the edges. I wondered when love becomes duty, and when duty quietly disappears. Over time, I began to feel like a visitor in my own home. I asked before using the kitchen. I lowered my voice when speaking. I stayed in my room longer than necessary. No one told me to do these things. I learned them through small looks, through pauses, through silence. I noticed how conversations stopped when I entered the room. Not abruptly, just gently, like someone turning down a radio. I pretended not to notice. Pretending became easier than asking. Meals changed too. They ate earlier or later. Sometimes, not at all. I began eating alone most days. A simple plate, a quiet chair, the sound of my own breathing. Food lost its taste, not because it was bad, but because joy had left the table. Still, I cleaned my plate. I always have. I asked myself many questions. Did I say something wrong? Did I ask for too much? Did I become invisible slowly, or all at once? I replayed conversations in my head, searching for mistakes. I found none that explained everything, only small misunderstandings that grew without being spoken about. Sometimes people don't leave because of one big reason. Sometimes they drift away because no one stops them. That thought stayed with me. One afternoon, it rained. Not heavily, just enough to soften the world outside. I sat on the edge of my bed and felt tears come without warning. They didn't fall quickly. They gathered slowly, like they had been waiting. I didn't sob. I didn't cry out. I just let them fall. That was the first time I allowed myself to feel the truth fully, that the promises were gone, that the care I was waiting for would not return. Oddly, that realization brought calm. After that day, I changed in small ways. I stopped waiting for apologies. I stopped hoping for explanations. Instead, I focused on what I could control. I cleaned my room and opened a window each morning. I let sunlight touch my face. I started writing small notes to myself, reminders that I still mattered. "You are still here," I wrote once. And I believed it. One evening, I wrote a letter. Not to accuse, not to beg, just to speak. I wrote about how I felt invisible, how silence hurts more than words, how I missed my son. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. I never gave it to anyone. Some things don't need to be heard to be real. Writing it was enough. Acceptance doesn't knock. It sits beside you quietly. I stopped feeling surprised when days passed without conversation. I stopped checking my phone so often. I stopped expecting change. Instead, I accepted the present for what it was. Not good, not fair, just real. And in accepting it, I felt lighter. Care is not just words spoken during happy times. It's presence during quiet ones. I learned that care should feel safe. It should feel steady. It should not disappear when it becomes inconvenient. This realization didn't make me bitter. It made me honest. I promised myself something that day, that I would never abandon my own needs again. Now my days are simple. I wake up early. I make my tea slowly. I sit near the window. I don't wait anymore. I don't chase conversations. I don't explain my worth. Peace came when I stopped asking for permission to exist. If I could speak to my younger self, I wouldn't warn her. Love requires risk. I would only tell her this. When people promise care, listen, but also watch. Actions stay longer than words. I don't regret loving deeply. I don't regret trusting. I only regret forgetting myself for a while. They promised to care for us. Then they disappeared. But I did not disappear. I am still here, breathing, remembering, learning. And that, I've learned, is its own kind of victory. Please don't forget to leave a review. Explore more by joining me on Patreon. Some days passed so quietly that I barely noticed them ending. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon slipped into evening. Time moved, even when nothing else did. I learned how loneliness can be loud without making a sound. It followed me from room to room. It sat beside me while I drank my tea. It lay next to me at night when sleep wouldn't come. I stopped marking days on the calendar. There was nothing to count down to, no visit planned, no conversation promised. Just space. I began to feel like I was watching life instead of living it. I saw my son leave the house each morning. I heard him return at night. But those moments felt distant, like scenes behind glass. Sometimes our eyes met briefly. He smiled, a polite smile. The kind you give a neighbor, not a mother. I returned the smile, not because I felt it, but because I didn't want to make things harder. That became my role. Making things easier by saying nothing. There is a strange pain in realizing you are no longer needed. Not asked for advice, not called for help, not included. I remembered a time when my hands were always busy for others. Cooking, cleaning, caring, loving. Now my hands rested quietly in my lap. I asked myself, who am I when no one needs me? The answer didn't come right away. One afternoon, a neighbor knocked on the door. She had noticed I hadn't been outside much. She brought me fruit. Nothing special, just apples and oranges. But she sat with me for a few minutes. She asked how I was. She listened. When she left, I cried again. Not because I was sad, but because someone had seen me. That day reminded me that care can come from unexpected places. I stopped hoping people would change. I started observing instead. I noticed how quickly life moves forward for some, while others are left standing still. I noticed how easy it is to forget those who no longer demand attention. This awareness didn't make me angry. It made me gentle. I became gentler with myself. I found joy in simple things again. The sound of birds in the morning, warm water on my hands while washing dishes, the smell of clean clothes. These moments didn't erase the pain, but they softened it. I realized joy doesn't need permission. It arrives quietly, if you let it. For a long time, one question stayed with me. Why wasn't I enough? One morning, while sitting by the window, the answer came gently. It wasn't about being enough. It was about people being unable. Unable to care. Unable to keep promises. Unable to face discomfort. That understanding lifted a burden I didn't know I was carrying. I said goodbye to the version of myself who waited, who hoped, who explained. I didn't hate her. I thanked her. She loved deeply. She trusted openly. She did her best with what she knew. But it was time to rest. Strength doesn't always look like standing tall. Sometimes it looks like sitting down and breathing through pain. I became strong in quiet ways. I learned how to be alone without feeling abandoned. I learned how to exist without approval. That strength felt steady, unshakable. If you are listening to this and feeling forgotten, I want you to know something. You are not invisible. You are not unnecessary. You are not alone in this feeling. Sometimes people disappear from our lives, not because we failed, but because they were never meant to stay. And sometimes what remains is a version of ourselves we haven't met yet. They promised to care for us. Then they disappeared. But I stayed. I stayed with my memories. I stayed with my heart. I stayed with my life. And in staying, I found something I thought I had lost. Myself.